Hello, friends. Thank you for being here. Each of you makes this channel alive and special. Thanks to your support, I can share stories, thoughts, and emotions that hopefully resonate in your heart. If you have just started exploring my content, welcome. Real-life stories are waiting for you here. Subscribe, like, and share your impressions. Your voice is very important to me. As I was driving past my son-in-law's house, I figured I might as well stop by. But then I noticed my wife's shiny silver Lexus parked at the gate. It should have been in our garage, and that raised a red flag for me. This isn't right, I thought, so I quietly sneaked over to the window, trying not to make a sound. What I heard inside shattered everything I believed. When the old fool finally signs the documents, we'll get everything we've ever wanted, I heard Margaret say, her voice dripping with malice through the partly open window. I was frozen in my car outside Brianna's house, the keys still in the ignition. Just moments ago, I'd called my daughter about going out for dinner. "Sorry, Dad, I'm not home," she'd cheerfully replied. "But Dan's around working on some files." Yet there was Margaret's Lexus in full view. I turned off the engine and slowly approached the window, my legs feeling weak. Peering through the small gap in the curtains, I saw them clearly. My wife of 25 years lounging on my daughter's couch like she owned it, with Dan leaning smugly against the bookshelf. "The timing's perfect," Dan said with the cold precision of a lawyer. "File in June, claim irreconcilable differences. Thanks to the new Iowa laws, Margaret bags half of everything plus lifelong spousal support." Margaret's laugh echoed, one I used to think was sweet. "The construction business alone is worth $12 million, she said. And then there's the rental properties, the vacation home, investments. It's nearly $20 million total." My hands shook as I fumbled to record with my phone, capturing Dan's detailed plot. "The best part," he boasted, "is Alan's gullible nature. He hasn't the faintest idea we've been tracking his assets for months. Every bank statement, property deed, and business evaluation. We've got copies." He nodded at a manila folder on the coffee table. "He basically handed us the keys to his kingdom." Margaret inspected her nails, smiling. 2 years of feigning to be the devoted wife, she said. Acting interested in his dull stories and pretending to care about his work troubles. The man honestly thinks I love him. At that moment, I accidentally crushed a twig underfoot, and their conversation stopped cold, their eyes darting nervously to the window. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart racing, sweat trickling despite the cool April breeze. "Did you hear that?" Margaret's voice carried suspicion. "Probably just the neighbor's cat," Dan reassured after a pause. "You're just being paranoid. Alan won't figure this out until we're good and ready." Margaret laughed mockingly. "He wouldn't recognize a trap if it was circled in neon." Dan smirked. "By September, you'll be divorced, wealthy, and free to do whatever you fancy with whoever you please." I stayed hidden until they restarted their vile plans, my phone capturing it all. After 15 minutes, I quietly returned to my car, realizing my life had been turned upside down. 25 years of marriage reduced to a cold scheme between my wife and her son-in-law. I couldn't stop picturing that folder on the table, all those plans they'd been hatching as I worked 16-hour days trying to build a future for us. I found myself in the driver's seat, staring at my hands on the wheel, the same hands that created a construction empire from scratch, that provided for Margaret's every comfort, that walked her down the aisle when her own dad wouldn't. Her mocking laugh haunted me. The man believes I love him. The saddest part? Just half an hour ago, I believed it too. Just as I was reaching for my car keys again, the front door opened. Margaret emerged first, her designer bag swinging nonchalantly, with Dan following, adjusting his tie as if nothing had happened. They didn't expect to see me in my Honda, and Margaret's face registered complete shock. "Alan," she faltered, her voice noticeably higher. "What are you doing here?" I forced myself to remain calm, though my heart was pounding out of my chest. After 25 years together, I thought I knew her well, but it turns out she'd been pretending all along. The whole time I'd been pretending. I told them I'd just wrapped up a job inspection in the area as I climbed out of the car, acting like it was no big deal. Thought I'd pop in and see Brianna, I added smoothly. Dan moved a little closer to Margaret, looking all protective, his lawyer instincts kicking in. He stared at me with his steely gray eyes, searching for any hint that I was lying. Margaret quickly blurted out, "She's not here," trying to cover up something. "We were just, organizing some legal files for Dan's client," she said, her lie rolling off her tongue like it was second nature. Funny how you don't question how many lies you've bought into over time. "Oh," I responded lightly, keeping it cool. "Thought you'd be at work till 6 today. Didn't you mention something about the Henderson proposal this morning?" She looked a bit panicked. "I left early, had a headache." "Sorry to hear that," I said, glancing at Dan with a forced friendliness. "Working on an interesting case?" "Asset division," he replied automatically, then seemed to catch himself. "For a divorce client, it's a pretty tangled financial deal. If the situation wasn't so devastating, it might have been amusing." Margaret's eyes flickered between us, calculating. "How long have you been here, Alan?" "Just pulled up." "Why?" No reason, but her smile was definitely fake. "You seem tense. Everything okay?" I almost laughed. The woman plotting my financial downfall for months was asking about my well-being. "Long day, you know how it is." I nodded towards Dan. "Don't let me stop your work." "We were about to finish up," Dan said, putting his hand on Margaret's back. The move looked familiar, intimate. Had that been happening for long? Good timing, then. I pulled out my phone to check the time, making sure they saw it. Neither reacted, but I noticed Dan's eyes on the screen. "I should head home. Dinner doesn't make itself." Margaret let out a laugh, though it sounded forced. "I'll be along soon, just to finish some stuff here." "Take your time." As I opened my car door and paused for effect, I said, "Oh, Margaret, Dr. Patterson's office called about your physical. They mentioned something about a schedule conflict." Her face went blank for a second, caught off guard, but she quickly recovered. "Must be a mix-up. I'll sort it out later." "No worries, happens all the time." I got into the driver's seat, my heart pounding. "See you both later." As I reversed out of the driveway, I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror. They stood frozen until my car rounded the corner, then quickly huddled together, talking urgently. Their little game of deception was coming full circle. Maybe they thought I'd caught a whiff of something. I already knew they were up to something, yet we all kept playing like it was all perfectly fine. Margaret would come home with her excuses for leaving work early and being at Dan's. She wouldn't know about the recording on my phone, 43 minutes of crisp audio that would flip everything upside down. As I merged into traffic, my hands were steady on the wheel for the first time in over an hour. The shock was morphing into something sharper, more focused. They thought they were outsmarting someone who couldn't keep up. They were about to see how wrong they were. The 15-minute drive home zipped by with the traffic lights and routine turns. Somehow, my Honda found its way into our circular driveway like it had a mind of its own, past the gardens Margaret insisted needed a professional touch, and the fountain she got for our 20th anniversary. I lingered in the car, staring at the home I built back in 1995. Every beam, every nail, every lovingly crafted detail was meant for the woman now thinking of taking it all from me. The house, once humming with Margaret's presence, her stories, gripes, and excitement over new purchases, now felt hollow. The wedding photo on the mantel grabbed my attention. December 15th, 1987. There we were, Margaret glowing in her ivory silk, and me looking awkward in a rented tux. Both of us were smiling, thinking we'd hit the jackpot of happiness. She was just 22, working as a secretary at Morrison & Associates downtown. I was 37, finally seeing my construction business make money after 10 tough years of 12-hour days fueled by instant noodles. We met at the company's Christmas party that year. I'd renovated their office earlier that spring, so I was there as a client. Margaret laughed at my lame joke about concrete mixers, a sound like tinkling bells that sparked something inside me. When I suggested dinner, she turned red and said yes in a heartbeat, almost as if she'd been waiting for the invite. Our first dinner at Romano's Italian restaurant lasted until midnight. She listened closely while I talked about my aspirations to create something lasting, something beyond our lifetimes. Her eyes sparkled when I described the homes I dreamed of building and the families I wanted to protect. "You're not just putting up walls," she said, reaching out to touch my hand. "You're making homes." I proposed 6 months later. The 25th anniversary card still sat on our kitchen table, dated last December. Margaret's handwriting was still elegant in blue ink. "To my amazing husband, thanks for making all my dreams come true. Here's to another 25 years of happiness. With all my love, Margaret." Her love, which now tasted bitter. I drifted into the living room where Brianna's baby photos adorned the shelves I had built while Margaret was expecting. June 8, 1995, our daughter's birthday. Margaret, worn out but radiant, held our red-faced wonder as if she was meant to be a mother. Those early days were the happiest of my life. Margaret threw herself into motherhood with the same enthusiasm she had for planning our wedding. Parent-teacher meetings, soccer matches, extravagant birthday themes, she chronicled everything with pride. "You're an amazing dad," she told me when Brianna graduated from high school, tears rolling as we watched our daughter get her diploma. "She will do great things because of the foundation you set." The foundation I set, not we. Had signs of trouble already begun to show? I sank into my leather recliner, the one Margaret always said didn't belong in the formal living room, letting memories rush over me. Our 10th anniversary trip to Alaska, where Margaret was entranced by glaciers and wildlife. Brianna's college graduation, all of us emotional as she collected her psychology degree. Christmas mornings full of laughter and chaos, with Margaret insisting on elaborate decorations. When did her gratitude turn into entitlement? When did thank you for giving us this life shift into, we deserve so much more? My phone held the harsh truth. Margaret hadn't loved me for years, maybe even decades. Every hug, every anniversary, and every "I love you" was calculated. A ploy to keep me working, earning, and padding the wealth she eventually aimed to claim. 25 years of my life boiled down to a legal strategy meeting. I sat in our dimming living room, surrounded by what I thought was the proof of a happy marriage, and something cold began to replace the grief. Margaret thought she was playing the long game, setting up for the best financial gain while keeping her actions hidden. But she didn't realize her husband had the same sharp strategy that built a construction powerhouse from nothing. The rules were about to change. The living room's quiet wrapped around me as I switched to thinking like the businessman I was. At what point did Margaret's actions stop being those of a partner and start being a play? The answer was clear. In 2020, when Cole Construction landed the Morrison Municipal Center deal, $50 million over 3 years, the biggest project we'd ever had. I came home that April night expecting to celebrate, maybe pop open some champagne, definitely get the enthusiastic support that had bolstered me at every milestone before. But instead, Margaret sat silently at the kitchen table with a real estate proposal, an unsent email to my lawyer outlining my next steps. Joyce was flipping through a property magazine, calculator in hand. "Looks like we can finally snag that house on Elm Street," she announced, eyes fixed on the page. "The one with the fancy driveway and pool. Hendersons are asking for $4.2 million. Not a single mention of everything I had achieved. No acknowledgement of the project that could create jobs for 300 people for years. She only cared about how my success could benefit her. I told her, "Margaret, I haven't even started the project yet. Still gotta handle design, permits, subcontractors, but the money's basically guaranteed, right?" She finally looked at me with her sharp green eyes. Once you sign the contract, the city's obligated to pay. We talked extensively for 2 hours about every little financial detail. New house, country club membership, nice cars, trips to Europe, all her plans. Her obsession with money should have been a warning, but I was too caught up with my project to notice. By 2021, her demands were insane. The country club became urgent after the Pattersons joined Riverside Hills. Our cozy cabin in Wisconsin felt too plain compared to the Johnsons' luxury spot in Aspen. Margaret often mentioned other spouses who supposedly appreciated their partners better. Our intimacy dwindled, but I blamed it on age and stress. We even moved to separate bedrooms because of my snoring, which she hadn't complained about in our 23 years together. Dinner conversations shifted from our lives to all the impressive things other families had. Last month, she talked about Sarah Mitchell's husband buying her a Mercedes for their anniversary, slicing her salmon carefully, attributing it to him valuing her sacrifices for their marriage. Sacrifices? As if living in luxury and supporting my career was a hardship. After Brianna's wedding in September 2023, Margaret and Dan started growing closer. She suddenly became interested in legal matters, asking about spousal rights and property division for a friend. She began taking phone calls in private, claiming they were about book clubs or volunteer work. How many were actually plotting sessions? Today's recording played in my mind. Dan's voice was clear. Been tracking his assets for months. Margaret's laughter followed, acting as a devoted wife for 25 years. It all made sense now, Margaret's sudden interest in my finances, her questions about business valuations, her push for joint accounts. While keeping separate credit cards, she'd been collecting intel as I built the empire she planned to take over. But Margaret underestimated my awareness. She didn't realize who she was dealing with. The same guy who built Cole Construction from nothing wasn't someone to disregard in strategic matters. They assumed I was oblivious. Margaret lined up her moves, thinking I couldn't see the game. She was about to learn the truth about who she married. I stood from the recliner and headed to my office, filled with 35 years' worth of business documents. Tax records, contracts, partnership agreements, property titles, everything she'd secretly gathered. What she didn't know was the real treasure wasn't in those papers. I picked up my phone, scanned my contacts, and found Marcus Webb's number. My accountant, my trusted advisor, and the one person who knew about the offshore strategy for tax purposes. It was time for a game-changer call. After 3 days of intense work, my home office turned into a strategy center. 2 laptops buzzed quietly on the sturdy mahogany desk I'd crafted 15 years ago. Their screens were filled with bank statements, legal databases, and an unsent email for my lawyer, ready to outline my strategy. Property records were spread all over, with yellow legal pads full of columns labeled assets, weaknesses, timeline, and leverage points. That morning, I made sure to shave precisely, put on my best navy suit, and wore the reading glasses that Margaret said made me look distinguished. It's funny how quickly grief can turn into strategy, especially when you're armed with 35 years of business know-how. Marcus Webb had been more supportive than I'd hoped. There were 3 offshore accounts I set up long ago for entirely legitimate tax purposes, fully documented, yet nearly invisible to anyone without deep accounting skills. Margaret's amateur sleuthing missed the real treasure. While she was busy cataloging the surface assets, the true crown jewels were hidden right where she never thought to look. Margaret wasn't just sitting around doing nothing. Her credit card bills told quite a story. $47,000 in sneaky transfers over 8 months to a shared savings account I had no idea about. The account name made my blood boil, Daniel Thompson. They were setting up a money partnership long before even thinking about divorce. Fancy lunches at the Riverside Country Club, $300 spa treatments, and designer clothes bought during so-called book club meetups painted a clear picture of someone gearing up for a whole new life. And then there was the 8th out of 500 Hermes handbag she snagged last Tuesday, which was oddly amusing, since she'd whined about grocery prices earlier that same day. Dan's issues added even more to the puzzle. My pals in the construction biz filled me in on Davenport's top attorney with big dreams but bigger debts. This guy plotting to swipe my fortune was neck-deep in debt, $180,000 in student loans, and an $8,500 monthly office rent, chosen more for its appearance than its usefulness. His habit of cutting ethical corners when money got tight was becoming notorious. Thompson's a clever lawyer, Jim Morrison from Morrison Concrete remarked while we sipped coffee. But he likes to live in luxury on a budget. Owes 3 of my subcontractors nearly 25 grand in total. Always promises to pay next week and then becomes a ghost when the bills are due. The State Bar Association's site showed 2 dismissed ethical complaints against him this past year, both about client fund mismanagement. Sure, they got dismissed, but they still lingered as a record. Even unresolved complaints left shadows on reputations in legal circles. I leaned back in my leather chair, mentally sifting through all the dirt gathered during 72 hours of diligent digging. Margaret and Dan had taken me for granted. They saw a trusting hubby who didn't have the time or inclination to quiz household spending. But they missed seeing the strategist who'd transformed Colson Construction from a single truck operation to a $12 million business. The phone's ring interrupted my tactical musing. Brianna's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," I greeted, keeping my tone upbeat. "How's your day going?" "Dad, I need to ask you something," she said, with the caution she reserved for tough patients. "Is everything all right with you and Mom lately? Things feel tense whenever I'm around you two." My hand clenched around the phone. What did she know? Had Dan leaked anything about their plot? "What makes you say that?" I probed. "Little signs. Mom's stressed about money, which is odd given that business is booming, and Dan's been asking strange questions about how your company works, like about partnerships and who holds what assets." She hesitated. "It seems like they're digging for info, but I can't figure out why." Digging for info. My daughter's psychology training had sniffed out the predatory vibe her mom and husband thought was well hidden. "Probably just curiosity about business," I replied, choosing my words cautiously. "Your mom's always had a thing for financial security." "Maybe," Brianna said, but doubt tinged her voice. "Dad, if something was seriously wrong, you'd let me know, right?" Her question felt heavy with implication. Tell her what? That her mom was plotting to financially ruin me? That her husband was orchestrating everything? That her picture-perfect family was built on a foundation of lies? "Of course, sweetheart, but everything's fine. Just the usual stuff." After I got off the phone, I just sat there, staring down at my notes. Dan had been digging for details on how my business ticked through my daughter. Their info-gathering mission was way bigger than I imagined. I needed them to have only the tidbits I chose to share. I was still ruminating on Brianna's tip about Dan's nosiness when my secure line rang. It was Sarah Chen, my go-to accountant since forever. Her voice had that serious, professional edge. "Alan, the asset protection papers are ready for you to sign. You mentioned tweaking your estate plan, so I took a deep dive into the best options." She paused for a moment. "This is about more than just estate planning, right?" Smart as a whip. That's Sarah. After 28 years in forensic accounting, you get good at reading between the lines. "Should I be asking what kind of threat we're guarding against?" she probed. "It's a personal matter," I replied. Her pause said it all. She'd managed 3 divorces for my construction managers, so she was clued in. "By noon, it'll all be set," she promised. "The business assets will be locked down tight from any personal legal messes. Anyone eyeing your personal stash won't even find a cent." By 10 a.m., I was sitting with Tom Bradley, president of First National Bank and my golf buddy for 15 years. The room smelled of coffee and leather, a place where I'd sealed countless construction loans. "We need to check on the account security," I said, sliding some papers over the table. "Verify and temporarily lock all joint access points until identity is confirmed." Tom's eyebrows inched up. This is pretty thorough, Alan. All joint accounts, credit lines, and automatic payments. Everything? Yep, every single one, I nodded. Got a reason? He asked cautiously. Not one I'll share, I replied, breaking into a grin. How quick do these security holds kick in? Once you sign, all account holders get the heads up that they need to show ID and other papers to access, Tom explained, watching my face. This is going to make things tricky for Margaret. That's the idea, I said. By 11:47 a.m., the security locks were active, just as Margaret was getting settled for her usual lunch at Riverside Country Club with her circle of construction wives. At 12:03 p.m., my phone pinged with a declined transaction alert. I was knee-deep in contractor bids when Margaret's frantic call came through at 12:50 p.m. Alan, something's up with our bank accounts. My card got declined at lunch, and the bank mentioned a security hold. Any idea what's going on? I played it cool. No mention of Dan being on the joint account. No hint about the missing $47,000. No way was I letting on that she'd been funneling money under my nose. Security hold? That sounds serious. Did they explain why? I asked. Something about needing to check identity and access, she replied, flustered. It's really embarrassing, Alan. I'm out with Linda, Susan, and Janet, and I can't even cover my meal. Her distress wasn't because I'd caught on to her scheme, but because her social image got a hit. After 25 years of marriage, I knew what mattered to Margaret. I'll call Tom Bradley right away, I told her. We'll sort this out. But I didn't call Tom. Instead, I drove to the construction site, where my crew was busy laying the foundation for a new medical center. The familiar hum of machinery and the team's chatter grounded me after days of financial chess moves. Throughout the afternoon, my phone buzzed with texts. Margaret at 1:47 p.m. Still no luck accessing accounts. This is insane. At 2:23 p.m., Tom Bradley's secretary says he's in meetings all day. What kind of bank president ignores his top clients? And at 3:15 p.m., even our emergency credit line's frozen. How am I supposed to shop for groceries? Each message felt like a small victory. For 25 years, Margaret had counted on the financial safety net I provided, thanks to my 60-hour work weeks. Now, she was feeling what it's like when that safety vanishes overnight. Dan's response was even more intriguing. By 4:30 p.m., my private investigator, Mike Rodriguez, checked in with an update. Thompson tried accessing the shared account he has with your wife 3 times today. He tried multiple times this afternoon. When that didn't pan out, he attempted to tap into what appears to be a trust fund for your daughter's education, a fund he's managing. But that account was sealed off as you instructed. Frustrated, he's been making furious calls to bank representatives, throwing around lawsuit threats and insisting on talking to someone in authority. It's the classic move of a bold lawyer suddenly stripped of their influence. By 6 p.m., I got back home and started sorting through the financial chaos of the day from my home office. All the joint accounts were frozen, every shared credit line was axed, and no automatic payments were going anywhere without my approval. Margaret's access to the assets we had collected over 25 years dwindled down to just the cash she carried with her. Everything was done by the book, perfectly legal for a husband, intent on safeguarding shared assets in the midst of estate planning. Tom Bradley would assure you it was all spot on per banking rules, but Margaret and Dan were definitely catching on. The man who was supposed to be blind to their financial ambush wasn't just sitting idle. At 6:47 p.m., my phone lit up with Margaret's number, but this time her voice would crack with desperation, not confidence. It was time to watch the partners in crime cannibalize one another as their plot crumbled. Over at Thompson & Associates, the security guy barely noticed Margaret storming in at 7:15 p.m., her heels staccato on the marble floor. Mike Rodriguez had a prime view from the coffee shop across the street. Margaret had made that panicked call from our driveway, a bit too loudly for the neighbor not to catch. Dan, we really need to talk. Everything's fallen apart. Privacy didn't seem her concern anymore. On the 14th floor, Dan's office lights burned bright, like there was an urgent meeting. Through the window, you could spot two figures hunched over a conference table cluttered with documents. Their body language screamed, "We've got a problem, he knows something." Margaret's voice drifted through the old vent system to a neighboring accounting office, where Mike's contact was stationed. "Alan's onto us and froze everything. I couldn't even get gas," she declared. Dan fired back in his lawyerly demeanor that the timing wasn't just chance. "3 days ago, you mentioned he unexpectedly showed up at Brianna's right when we were hashing things out. He might have caught some of that." "How much do you think he knows?" Margaret inquired. "Enough," Dan admitted. "We should assume he recorded us discussing assets, schedules, and strategies." The silence that followed was as loud as a bomb, two schemers realizing they were outsmarted. "What's the plan now?" Margaret's bravado barely held together. "We accelerate everything, no more tiptoeing," Dan instructed. "Come Monday, I'm moving forward with a fast-track divorce filing, demanding immediate spousal support. We'll argue Alan's financially abusing you by cutting off access to marital funds." Margaret perked up at this angle, intrigued by the legal maneuvering. Dan continued, "We flip the script. He becomes the controlling spouse who wields money as a weapon, while those locked accounts bolster our narrative of his financial abuse, not his defense." The sound of shuffling papers echoed as their illicit strategy took shape. Dan urged her to recall any moments of emotional manipulation, financial control, or intimidation throughout the marriage. "Think back," Dan prompted. "Anytime Alan decided financial matters without consulting you, questioned your spending, used money to influence you. That's our case." "That's a reach," Margaret warned. "If anything, he was always too easygoing about money." Dan rebutted, "We'll paint his generosity as a snare, depict every provision as a ploy to keep you reliant. Every gift, every luxury, every bit of comfort, it all serves to prove his intent to isolate you." And thus, their audacious scheme unfolded. Their plan was breathtakingly bold. They aimed to transform 25 years of Alan's dedication and goodwill into allegations of misconduct, turning each gesture of affection into a claimed act of oppression. "And what about Brianna?" Margaret asked. "She's not going to automatically take my side. Her psychology background makes her scrutinize everything." "That's just right," Dan said, sounding pleased, like he'd just found the missing piece to a puzzle. "Brianna hesitating to show support straight away only highlights how much Alan has messed with the family dynamic. We'll twist her psych background to make it seem like Alan used it to drive a wedge between her and her mom. Are we trying to turn our daughter against her dad? My aim is to secure your financial future, Margaret. Given Brianna's professional credentials, her words have weight. If she voices any concern about our family situation, we can pitch it as a professional opinion, emphasizing Alan's manipulative traits." It was a wickedly smart plan. Brianna's doubt about her father being spun into a weapon against him, every kind gesture becoming calculated, and financial precautions being painted as abuse. On Monday morning, Dan continued, "I'll file emergency restraining orders to stop any further financial moves, ask for an immediate $15,000 a month in spousal support, and request temporary exclusive rights to the marital home. By midweek, we'll have him pegged as an abusive husband, needing court supervision to prevent any further financial strong-arming. And if he resists, we'll crank it up. Claim harassment if he tries to contact you directly. Accuse him of stalking if he tries to find out what we're up to. Label it emotional abuse if he questions what we're saying." Dan had a spine-chilling satisfaction as he explained. The tricky part about domestic abuse laws is that denying accusations can actually look like guilt. The more he tries to defend himself, the more controlling he'll appear. Margaret laughed without humor. Poor Alan. He has no clue what's about to unfold. Years of being the trusting spouse. It's time he learns that playing nice doesn't always pay. They spent an hour and more rehearsing their versions of events, setting up secure lines of communication, and gearing up for what Dan called absolute legal warfare. Every talk, every meeting, every financial move was spun into part of a pattern of Alan's alleged systematic abuse. The plan grew beyond just snagging assets. It was about taking down his reputation, aiming to wreck Alan's finances, his relationship with their daughter, and his standing in the community he had been a part of for 30 years. As Margaret finally left the building at 9:30 p.m., her phone buzzed with Dan's first strategic text. "Remember, you're not just an upset wife now. You're a scared victim, finding the courage to escape your abuser." The battle lines were drawn. By Saturday morning, Margaret and Brianna were at Café Luna, their usual place for mother-daughter brunches over the past 5 years. Margaret picked their usual snug corner table, perfect for heart-to-hearts. But today, she wasn't looking for maternal bonding. She needed her daughter's professional insight. "Brianna, we need to talk about your father." Margaret's voice carried a well-measured hint of vulnerability. "I think something's off with him, mentally." Brianna set her coffee cup down with a precision that said she was slipping into her therapist mode. "What do you mean by off, Mom? He's been showing controlling behavior, paranoia. He started limiting my access to our bank accounts, saying it's for security." But Margaret let her sentences trail off, leaving gaps for her daughter to fill. "How long has this been going on?" "A few months, maybe more. I thought it was just work stress. But yesterday, he completely cut me out of all our shared accounts. I couldn't even pay for lunch." Brianna leaned in closer, her training kicking in despite the personal stakes. "Mom, financial control can be a form of domestic abuse, but sometimes it's just part of handling business shifts or other legal changes. What's Dad's side of the story?" The question threw Margaret off balance, too direct, too matter-of-fact. She'd been hoping for empathy, not a professional breakdown. "He says this whole account thing isn't just standard procedure, Brianna. I've been with him for 25 years. This isn't normal. It feels like a punishment. But what exactly have I done to deserve it?" Margaret hesitated, unsure how much she could reveal without endangering her own secret. She thought he might be on to her questioning their marriage, and maybe he was trying to frighten her into staying. "Mom?" Brianna spoke in that tone she used with patients who played mind games. "Are you suggesting Dad's using finances to keep a divorce off the table? Or is it you who's thinking about divorce while Dad's just protecting his assets?" That was uncomfortably close to the truth. Margaret decided to shift her approach. "What I'm really saying is your dad's been acting really strange lately. You're the psychologist here? Maybe you have some ideas." Brianna replied, "You know, big changes in behavior usually have a trigger. What happened 3 days ago that made Dad suddenly lock you out of the accounts?" Margaret's thoughts were racing. Brianna was sharp and wouldn't let emotions cloud her judgment without solid evidence. Each question started to unravel the story Margaret was trying to construct. "I really don't know what set him off. That's what's so scary." Brianna studied her mother's face, using her skills to detect subtle clues and inconsistencies. "Mom, are you just seeking psychological advice, or are you pulling me into a dispute with Dad?" The direct question shattered Margaret's attempt to steer the situation. Her daughter wasn't going to blindly back her perspective. "I need you to help me figure out what's going on with us," Margaret urged. Brianna responded firmly. "Then have an open talk with Dad about your worries, instead of expecting me to psychoanalyze him through your lens." Margaret left the table 20 minutes later, frustrated with her daughter's professional detachment and worried about its implications. Without Brianna naturally taking her side, Margaret's story could fall apart under scrutiny. Meanwhile, 40 minutes away at the Cole construction office, I was about to receive news that would change everything. Jim Morrison called at 10:15 a.m. while I was reviewing weekend site reports. "Alan thought you'd like to know. Dan Thompson's in hot water with the State Bar Association. They're looking into his handling of contractor payments on the Mitchell case." "What's happening?" I asked. 3 subcontractors filed complaints last month saying he didn't pay them. He collected fees from his client, but the trades didn't see any money. That's a serious trust account issue if proven. I set my coffee aside. What were the implications? It's grave enough that a hearing is scheduled for next week. Thompson's scrambling to get $23,000 to settle with the subcontractors before the investigation wraps up. That $23,000 was the same amount I'd come across during my own inquiries. Jim, would those subcontractors be open to discussing their experience with Thompson if someone from our team reached out? For sure. They're really angry. Thompson kept delaying payments for 6 months, always making excuses, blaming his client or legal delays. They're small businesses that can't absorb those hits. For the next 3 hours, I engaged in strategic phone calls. I reached out to Bob Martinez from Martinez Electrical, waiting 8 months for $7,400. Steve Chen from Chen Plumbing owed $9,200 since last October, and Randy Foster from Foster Roofing still counting on $6,500 from a November job. Each conversation aimed at maintaining professional courtesy from Cole Construction while checking references before potentially hiring Thompson for legal services. Each contractor was eager to share their stories of Dan's shady payment habits, ethical breaches, and unreliable conduct. By 1 p.m., I had compiled a file filled with evidence on Dan's misuse of client trust accounts as his own personal account, violating state bar rules and misleading subcontractors about payment timelines. At 2:30 p.m., I reached out to the State Bar Association's ethical complaint line. I'd like to officially report an attorney. I let the intake specialist know about Dan Thompson's sketchy behavior. He was misusing client trust accounts and consistently breaking promises to folks in the construction biz. The complaint form needed a lot of detail, so I spilled the beans with contractor names, the money they were owed, a timeline of Dan's deceit, and evidence of his misuse of client cash. I even had 3 more contractors who were willing to back me up if needed. By late afternoon, his law office was bombarded with calls from the Bar Association about a swift investigation and an obligatory hearing. His reputation, which he had crafted by manipulating me, was now getting a checkup. At 4:47 p.m. sharp, my phone buzzed with a text from Mike Rodriguez. He mentioned Dan had just left with boxes of files, heading for his car. Should he tail him? Nope, I texted back. I knew exactly where Dan was off to. He'd drive straight to Margaret, sheer panic fueling his actions. Their carefully crafted plan was turning into a full-blown disaster. Let them panic. Let them slip up. The real game was just kicking off. In those chaotic 2 days, Brianna had time to soak everything in. Driving to Cole Construction felt like steering toward a long-dodged showdown. My office building stood firm, a mix of brick and steel, mirroring honest work, something Dan's shiny office could only pretend to be. Sarah, my secretary of 8 solid years, greeted Brianna like family, someone who actually pops by job sites and shows at company parties. "He's expecting you, darling. Go right in," she chuckled. I rose as Brianna stepped in, picking up on her body language with the keen eye I'd honed from watching Margaret over the years. But Brianna was different, with a calm, professional air. "Dad, we need to talk about you and Mom," she stated, using the same clinical tone she would with her clients. "I've spent the last 2 days digging into everything, and now I need your side of the story." "So, what's Mom said to you?" I asked. "That you're being controlling, financially sneaky, maybe even emotionally abusive," she said, settled across from me, her hands resting calmly. "She wants me to boost her story using my professional creds." Hearing such formal talk from my daughter was strange, but I understood her method, keeping feelings at bay to see the situation clearly. "And what do you think?" "I think Mom tried to manipulate me, just like she's apparently doing to you." Brianna's eyes, much like Margaret's but somehow clearer, studied my face. "Show me the evidence, Dad. I need to see what you've seen." I hesitated. Playing that recording would mean exposing her to the harsh truth about her mom and husband. But Brianna was 30, a psychologist, ready to face realities. I hit play on my phone. Margaret's voice poured into the room. "When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for." For the first minute, Brianna maintained her professional cool, listening to her mom mock their 25-year marriage. She heard Dan's plots for financial gain and their cold chatter about splitting everything up. But when Margaret talked about playing the good wife for 25 years, Brianna's calm began to fray. Her hands clenched, then loosened. Once the recording stopped, the silence between us was awkward, like an unbridgeable gap. "How long have you known?" she finally asked. "6 days. I overheard them at your house last Tuesday," I said. "And you've been?" she began to ask. "Piecing together a defense while playing along as if nothing's changed," I confirmed. She leaned back, digesting the news. "Mom wanted me to evaluate your mental state, to make a professional claim that you were abusive." "And what did you tell her?" "That I couldn't ethically diagnose someone without a proper evaluation, and that her allegations didn't align with how you normally behave." Now, Brianna's voice had an edge of anger. "She tried to use me. Dad, I'm using my training against you, crossing personal and professional lines. The sting of betrayal was heavy, mine and hers. I'm sorry you're caught in this mess, honey." "I'm not," she shot back firmly. "I'm glad I know the truth. What's our next step?" I looked at my daughter, seeing the strength I helped nurture blend with a fierce independence. "Brianna, that's your call. I'm not going to force you into taking sides." "I already have," she declared, holding her ground firm. "I'm choosing honesty over blind family loyalty. I'm picking facts over emotions. I'm siding with the parent who respected my professional principles." Relief hit me like a wave, soon turning into concern. "What about Dan?" I asked. "What about him?" she shot back, her tone now ice cold. "He tried to sabotage Dad financially, using my psychology practice as a front. Our marriage is done." "Brianna, I'm not doing this out of spite, Dad," she pressed on. "It's about judging character and actions." She moved towards the door but paused. "I'm ready to testify honestly about our family if needed, but I refuse to be anyone's pawn, not even yours." "I get it." "Good, because I've got more to handle." She left my office, looking like someone who finally found clarity in the chaos. 20 minutes later, she'd faced the man who not only wronged me, but also attacked the professional standards she fought so hard to maintain. I stayed in my office, surrounded by reminders of 35 years of honest work. For the first time since this mess began, I felt like the truth might actually prevail. At 7:30 p.m., the sound of Brianna's key in the lock startled Dan, who clearly didn't expect her home early. He was slouched on the couch, legal papers strewn around him, and a bottle of whiskey within reach. "We need to talk," I stated, setting my purse down firmly. "Tough day?" he asked, eyes glued to some case file as a pretense. "The Barrett deposition got postponed again." "I'm aware of the plot, Dan." His head jerked up, the polished lawyer facade slipping to expose a desperate man. "What plot?" "The one where you and my mom planned to bankrupt Dad, using my credentials to endorse false abuse claims." I remained standing, holding the upper hand. I overheard the recording, every single word. With feigned calmness, he placed his whiskey down. "Brianna, you must be confused. Sound familiar? Like 25 years of playing the devoted spouse?" His face turned ghostly pale. The same Dan Thompson who could take on Supreme Court cases now seemed like he was witnessing his life fall apart. "How much did you hear?" "Everything. Asset division plans, timelines, fee structures, your talks with Mom." I took a seat across from him, maintaining a cool distance. "Was our entire marriage just part of this scheme?" 3 days later, Margaret realized social downfall travels faster than lawsuits. At the bustling brunch at Riverside Country Club, conversations hummed but went silent when she approached. Linda Patterson, her bridge partner for years, suddenly became fascinated with her Eggs Benedict when Margaret said hello. Susan Morrison faked an urgent phone call to end their conversation. By the time she reached her usual spot, Margaret knew word of the conspiracy was out. "Margaret, dear," Janet Crawford greeted her with fake politeness. "We missed you at the meeting yesterday." "What meeting? I wasn't told." "Oh, didn't you get the memo? We had to make some changes. I'm sure you understand." Margaret started catching on to the pattern: missed calls, withdrawn invites, social doors quietly closing. Meanwhile, I ran my own more successful operation. Decades of truthfulness earned me a reputation that no legal scheme could tarnish. My lunchtime chat with Tom Bradley at the bank proved strategically beneficial. I shared my family troubles with just enough detail to paint the picture without going overboard. Margaret and our son-in-law had cooked up some plans regarding our assets, which I casually brought up over coffee. I had to implement some protections. Tom resonated just as I'd hoped, mixing professional insight with personal empathy for a friend facing family betrayal. That evening at the Chamber of Commerce meeting also proved useful. When Jim Morrison asked why Margaret hadn't attended the recent fundraising dinner, I admitted our marriage had hit some bumps. "Sometimes people aren't who you believe they are," I shared, letting my disappointment seep through. "Married 2 years and she was already scheming. It's fortunate I discovered it when I did." By Sunday night, Margaret found herself completely alone socially. The country club's committee was about to review her membership, and the charity board had accepted her resignation from positions she technically never stepped down from. At the same time, Dan's career was unraveling just like Margaret's social life was. 3 big clients pulled out, questioning his judgment and ethics. Miller Industries, a lucrative $200,000 a year contract, sent a formal letter voicing their distrust in his discretion. Margaret's frantic late-night phone call reverberated through their thin apartment walls. "Everyone knows, Dan. I can't show my face here. We'll file emergency motions on Monday. Force Alan into defensive mode. Or what? You lose your law license and I end up back living with my sister in Minnesota." Blame flew back and forth until midnight, 2 schemers realizing shared blame didn't equal shared solutions. Tomorrow was their final chance. I was prepared for it. Monday morning, Margaret sat in Linda Hawthorne's downtown office, an infamous divorce attorney known for her tough tactics. From the conference room, you could see the courthouse where Margaret intended to ruin me, but Linda wasn't overly optimistic. "Mrs. Cole, I've reviewed your documents," she said, doubt lacing her words. "Your husband has taken legally sound financial precautions. Joint account holders can limit access when marriages get rocky." Margaret's desperation was palpable. "It's financial abuse. He's controlling access to money we earned together." Linda scanned the tax records and replied, "That's money he made over 25 years. Your contribution appears minimal since you haven't worked outside the home since 1989. Margaret flushed with embarrassment. Being a homemaker once felt like security, but now it seemed more like dependency. "What about emotional abuse, intimidation?" Linda asked. "Do you have specific incidents you can prove?" Margaret had spent sleepless nights trying to twist 25 years of Alan's kindness and generosity into a convincing narrative. "He's always been controlling with money," she insisted. But Linda probed further. "Can you cite examples of threats, physical intimidation, isolation from friends or family?" Margaret hesitated, admitting, "No, I've never been stopped from seeing anyone." Linda continued, "To support a domestic abuse claim, you need evidence. Has he ever physically threatened you, stopped you from leaving, or monitored your communications?" Each question picked apart her story. Alan had never yelled at her, restricted her, or questioned who she spent time with. Meanwhile, 10 blocks away, Dan was waking up to the reality that bar association investigations move swiftly when necessary. The Monday morning call from the ethics committee brought more than just client payment issues. "Mr. Thompson, we're hearing complaints about your handling of client trust accounts, specifically that you've misused funds for personal expenses while cases were pending." Dan clenched the phone. These accusations aren't true. I've maintained proper records. But they had documents from Martinez Electrical showing invoices from 8 months ago with unfulfilled promises of payment. The client signed off, but they had actually settled half a year back. So where did the money end up? As it turned out, in Dan's personal bank account, with contractor payments cleverly diverted to cover rent and student loans. What had once seemed like clever financial maneuvering now appeared more like embezzlement. There might have been some misunderstanding, Mr. Thompson, but we're scheduling a hearing for Thursday morning. Gather all your financial records related to client accounts from the past 18 months. By Wednesday night, Margaret and Dan were close to breaking, considering desperate options. Meeting in Dan's sparsely furnished office felt like plotting a hopeless strategy without any resources. We have to claim domestic violence, Margaret insisted, trying to sound sure of herself. It's our only shot at putting Alan on the defensive. Margaret, fabricating domestic violence allegations could lead to felony charges if we get caught, especially if Alan has evidence, Dan replied. What evidence? I've never slipped up in front of cameras or people. She hesitated, recalling the recording that set everything in motion. The recording clearly showed us planning, not capturing any wrongdoing, so let's approach this differently. You handle the legal stuff, I'll act like the upset victim, and together we'll create a story of long-term emotional and financial manipulation. Dan glanced at her from across the table. Just half a year ago, she was a housewife looking for some excitement. Now here she was, talking about lying in a federal court. If this backfires, we'll face criminal charges. If we do nothing, I'm looking at financial disaster, and you'll lose your license to practice law anyway, Margaret said, with the conviction of someone who had nothing left to lose except taking others down along the way. At least by doing this, we'd go down fighting. Thursday's restraining order hearing would decide if this desperate attempt would work, or if they'd just given Alan more ammunition for his case. What they didn't know was Alan had been busy all week, gathering evidence from every call, every urgent meeting, every lie told to friends and attorneys. Alan Cole wasn't just defending himself anymore, he was putting together his own case. The Davenport County Courthouse felt different on May 1st. Like years of honest reputation had turned into a weapon at my disposal. Judge Patricia Hendricks, known for her no-nonsense approach, had seen all kinds of family deceit in her court. Margaret sat beside Linda Hawthorne, looking the part of a battered spouse with her simple dress, minimal makeup, and a nervous demeanor, likely genuine given the stakes. Mrs. Cole, Judge Hendricks began, let's go through your request for an emergency restraining order. You say your husband is guilty of financial abuse and threats. Can you explain the incidents that make you fear for your safety? Margaret's voice quivered, expertly portraying vulnerability. Your Honor, my husband's been keeping me away from our bank accounts, tracking my expenses, and threatening what would happen if I tried to leave. And what kind of threats are these, Mrs. Cole? Financial ones, leaving me nothing and damaging my reputation with his business ties. She paused for dramatic effect. Last week he entirely cut off my access to funds, even for basic needs. I watched as my wife of 25 years wove a web of lies with growing assurance, each falsehood reinforcing the last, creating a narrative of abuse against the man who had provided her every luxury she wanted. Judge Hendricks turned her attention to my lawyer, James Morrison. Does the defendant have a response? James stood up, with the unwavering confidence that comes from 30 years of practicing law without resorting to deception. Your Honor, we have evidence proving Mrs. Cole's accusations are manufactured, part of a well-planned scheme to defraud the defendant of marital assets. That's a bold accusation, Counselor. We have a recording of Mrs. Cole conspiring with Daniel Thompson to hatch this plan 6 weeks ago. Margaret went pale, and Linda Hawthorne urgently leaned toward her client, but there was no rescuing a case built entirely on deceit. I'd like to present... James connected his phone to the courtroom sound system, and Margaret's voice filled the room. Once that old fool signs the documents, we'll have everything we wanted. For 43 long minutes, Judge Hriss listened as their entire plot unfolded. Margaret's mockery of their marriage, Dan's plans to take assets, and their scheme to misuse Brianna's psychology credentials were all exposed. Margaret said in the recording, with chilling disregard, "The guy really thinks I love him." I watched as my wife's carefully spun tale of victimhood came apart. Her coached claims of fearing for her safety seemed ludicrous, alongside her playful comments about fooling the old man. Judge Hriss stopped the recording. "Mrs. Cole, would you like to respond to this evidence?" Margaret was speechless. Linda Hawthorne's face went pale as she realized her client had set her up to file false court paperwork. "Your Honor," Linda said cautiously, "I request to withdraw from this case. I wasn't aware of these facts when I took it on." "Sure," Judge Hendricks said, looking at Margaret the same way she eyed anyone who lied on the stand. "Mrs. Cole, I'm dismissing your restraining order request, and I'll alert the district attorney about a potential perjury case." The gavel came down hard, echoing through the room. 2 weeks later, the divorce settlement showed just how much Margaret messed up. Because of her lies, she couldn't get any spousal support, and the prenup from 1973 left her with only a tiny share of the assets. Dan's law license got permanently revoked once the bar uncovered $127,000 that went missing from client accounts. Last I heard, he moved to Nebraska and is working as a paralegal. Brianna went ahead and filed for divorce right after the hearing, citing irreconcilable differences. Now she's building a new practice focused on family therapy, particularly on spotting manipulation. 6 months later, Margaret is working retail at the same mall where she used to splurge with my money on luxury items. The irony isn't lost on either of us. I've managed to restore Cole Construction's name better than before. The community's support throughout my family drama transformed into fresh contracts and stronger business ties. The house feels different now, quieter, but more real. There's no more acting in conversations or faked tenderness, just the pleasant sound of rain on the windows I built in a home that's truly mine again. Margaret was right about one thing. I did believe she loved me. Now I know what real love looks like compared to mere theatrics.